There are jobs born to earn respect, jobs built to earn fear, and then there is one profession carved entirely from silence. Filth. And shadows a profession so ugly that even whispering its name at night makes the darkness stiffen like it has begun to breathe. That profession is the medieval assassin. A figure stripped of every romantic illusion we love in movies. Stripped of heroism. Stripped of glory. And eventually, stripped of humanity itself. The moment you step inside this world, your name ceases to matter. Your past dissolves like smoke, and all that remains is your shadow following you closely enough to feel like a noose. What unfolds here is not just a story, but a descent, a long fall through mountain camps, blood-soaked alleys, sleepless nights, and the quiet, unbearable confessions no assassin ever dared to say aloud. Becoming a medieval assassin was never a noble calling. No one meditated on mountaintops for 10 years, or trained with a wise master whose beard swept the ground like ancient snow. Most assassins were recruited after being caught stealing a loaf of stale bread. Someone would lean close in the market, whispering, "Can you climb walls? Do you hate nobles?" And just like that, fate snapped shut like a bear trap. They weren't given beautifully engraved daggers or armor, forged by legendary smiths. They were handed rusted knives that could break in mid-stab, ropes that frayed at the touch, and sometimes nothing more than a hollow prayer that the next guard they met didn't have better aim than they did. Their diet was crusted bread, river water, and the kind of meals you only eat when you know dying from starvation is the slower death. Assignments were never noble. An assassin could spend a week pretending to be a wandering monk, a candle seller, a fish vendor, or even a silent barrel sitting in the corner of a storage room. They learned to hide in filth, to sleep beside rats, to sit motionless until their limbs turned to stone. Their lives were spent squeezing themselves into cracks between breathing and not existing. Then came the mountain camps, the secret training heavens of misery, where the day did not begin with a warm greeting, but with the scream of a recruit who had stepped in the wrong place and fallen from a cliff. Lessons were brutal, deliberately designed to kill the weak. If a trainee survived Lesson 1, they were thrown into Lesson 2. If they survived Lesson 2, they were expected to survive Lesson 3. And if they survived all of them, they were told, "Good. You have survived your internship." Graduation from training didn't involve speeches, diplomas, or celebrations. There was no group photo. There was only a cold whisper, "You are a shadow now. Go." From that moment forward, assassins walked among cities like ghosts. They were hired to kill nobles, generals, thieves, or whoever happened to stand in someone else's way. Their reward was always meager. Half a bag of silver, maybe a ring, maybe a sickly horse with crossed eyes, or sometimes nothing at all. Because betrayal was tradition, a client might thank you for eliminating a governor, but the next sentence would be, "I never expected you to actually kill him. Now leave, and forget we ever met." High-paying missions were curses. If the reward was triple, the risk was triple. The target was always surrounded by soldiers, dogs, alarms, or divine protections. No assassin could predict. Many died on the very job that was supposed to change their life. And if they failed, failure was not a mistake. Failure was a death sentence. No trial, no defense, no second chances. An assassin could be hanged upside down in the square, burned alive with their weapons, or publicly ripped apart because fear was the only law that mattered. Even their own employers would kill them after a mission to erase any trace of involvement. An assassin was never a partner. They were evidence waiting to be destroyed. But the darkest part of their story isn't the violence, it's the loneliness. They were forbidden from love, forbidden from family, forbidden from attachment. Any affection was a liability. Any hesitation was fatal. Yet some still slipped. They froze at the sight of an old man praying for his grandson, or a mother rocking a child to sleep, or a scholar writing late into the night. Some spared innocent lives. Some paid for that mercy with their own, and others lived long enough to regret it, carrying guilt like a stone in their chest that never softened. Night after night, they slept with their knife under the pillow, dreaming of faces they didn't kill and faces they wished they hadn't killed. By the time they reached old age, if they reached old age, they were no longer assassins. Not really. They were hollowed-out silhouettes living in small houses with fake names, avoiding eye contact with neighbors, flinching at the sound of footsteps behind them. Some wandered into chapels asking not for salvation, but for sleep. One whispered to a priest, "I don't ask for heaven. I only ask for one peaceful night." This is the truth behind the blade. The life of a medieval assassin wasn't built on strength or skill. It was built on fear, hunger, betrayal, silence, and the slow erosion of the soul. And this series' 10 long parts will take you through every layer of their existence. From the moment they are recruited, through the horrors of training, the chaos of missions, the cruelty of employers, the torment of conscience, the weight of guilt, the fear of law, the collapse of family, the shadows of memory, and finally the quiet, trembling question. Every assassin asks at the end, if I were given another life, would I choose differently? If you're ready, leave the light on, because once you enter the world of the assassin, even the darkness begins to watch you. You'll find yourself slipping into this next part the way a shadow slides across stone, quietly, without ceremony, without needing to be announced. After all, once someone has stepped beyond the threshold of an assassin's world, there is no chapter division, nor clean page turn, only the slow continuation of a life that never truly pauses. From the moment you earned that whispered sentence, you are a shadow now. The world stopped offering you choices. It only offered consequences. And so your days began to unravel into nights, and your nights bled into mornings, until time itself became nothing more than the distance between one heartbeat and the next. Each one reminding you that you were alive only because someone else had not been fast enough to kill you. You learned very quickly that life after training was not a reward but a test. A long unending test, where each breath had to be precise and each step had to be calculated. When you left the mountain, the air felt different, thinner somehow, as if it knew you no longer belonged to any place inhabited by ordinary people. Villages seemed too loud, markets too crowded, and even the sound of a baby crying felt like an alarm revealing your presence. You walked through towns with your head lowered, your cloak pulled tight, your boots always stepping where the mud was quietest. People brushed past you without seeing you, the way they ignore a stray dog on the roadside, because to truly notice you would mean acknowledging something they weren't prepared to understand. And in that strange invisibility, you tasted both safety and a loneliness that scratched at your ribs like a trapped animal. Your first assignment came not in the dramatic form of a sealed scroll or a mysterious messenger, but through a bread vendor, a hunched old woman whose voice quivered like worn parchment. She didn't look at you, not even once, as she muttered the details softly enough that only someone trained to hear through walls could have caught them. A steward, wealthy, cruel, wanted gone. No reason given, no explanation needed. You stood there between baskets of loaves, the smell of yeast and smoke drifting around you, and in that moment something inside you tightened, not dread, not excitement, something colder, something like an acceptance of a path you no longer controlled. You followed the instructions silently, moving through alleys as narrow as the blade resting against your ribs. Mapping routes, not with thought, but with instinct. The way a wolf tracks prey, even in unfamiliar forests. You spent 3 days watching the steward from afar, sitting beside wells, pretending to mend nets, blending into lines of people who waited for bread or prayed for mercy. You memorized every gesture he made, every twitch of his eyelids when servants displeased him, every habit that could reveal a moment of weakness. And when the night finally came, when the moon slipped behind clouds like it too wished to avoid witnessing what you were about to do, you didn't enter the house through the windows or the doors. You moved through the storage cellar, slipping between barrels, like a breath moving between ribs. The steward slept with a candle burning low beside him, a habit born out of guilt rather than fear, and as you stood over him, your dagger hovering above the soft place where breath begins and ends, you felt a strange stillness settle inside you. Not hesitation, not remorse, just a quiet clarity, as if the world had narrowed into a single point where steel and skin were destined to meet. When you walked out of the house minutes later, no alarm was raised, no dog barked, no servant stirred. And yet you felt the shift not in the air, but in yourself. You had crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. You were no longer a trainee surviving tests, but a weapon fulfilling its purpose. The city behind you hummed with life, unaware that its balance had shifted, unaware that you had become part of the machinery that governed power from beneath the surface. But even as you walked, even as you melted back into the labyrinth of streets, you understood something the trainers had never said aloud. Killing someone was not the hardest part of being an assassin. Living with the silence afterward was. Days passed strangely after your first kill. You didn't celebrate, didn't sleep better, didn't feel pride. Instead, your senses sharpened, as if expecting the world to retaliate for what you'd done. Every footstep behind you felt heavier than usual. Every whisper seemed a fraction too close. You avoided crowds entirely, slipping around corners the moment a group of merchants approached, ducking into doorways when guards strolled by, sitting with your back pressed to walls, even when you pretended to rest. It wasn't fear, it was instinct, something trained into your bones until it became indistinguishable from your heartbeat. And every night you lay awake, listening to the creaks of the building settling, convinced that one of those sounds wasn't the building at all, but a blade being unsheathed slowly by someone tasked with hunting you. The second assignment arrived even quieter than the first. This time, it was a child, a beggar boy wearing a torn tunic, who sat beside you as you ate a handful of roasted chestnuts. He never looked at you directly. He simply held out a small pebble, smooth and flat, scratched with a mark only your order used, a circle divided by a single diagonal line. You took the pebble, and the boy vanished before you even finished blinking. That was the rule. No words, no questions, only symbols and silence. You didn't know who wanted the next target dead, or why they wanted it done quickly. But the mark was clear enough urgency. And urgency in your trade meant danger not just to the target, but to you. This target was a merchant, a man who lived behind thick walls and thick lies, someone who smiled generously to the public, but pocketed gold stolen from the desperate. Unlike the steward, he never walked alone. Guards patrolled every corridor of his estate. His dogs were trained to recognize scents that didn't belong. Even the servants whispered that the man feared being murdered by shadows. You needed a disguise. Not the simple ones you used before, but something that would let you move freely among the household without raising suspicion. And so you became a repairman, carrying a sack of tools older than the estate itself, walking with a slight limp, so convincing that even your own muscles believed it. You blended into the workers, keeping your face turned away, your voice buried in your throat, until the right moment came when the merchant dismissed his guards for dinner and stepped alone toward the private study he used to count coins he never earned. The kill was quick, so quiet you could hear his final breath curl through the air like a fragment of smoke, and yet leaving was the hardest part. Guards approached. Footsteps thundered. You knew staying inside would mean death. So you turned toward the only exit you had left. One that no assassin should ever be forced to use, but that every assassin used at least once in their life. You moved through the sewage pit, the stench wrapping around your skin like a second cloak, and for 3 hours you remained submerged in filth, barely breathing, waiting for the guards to stop searching. When you finally climbed out, trembling from the cold, covered in grime, you realized again the truth. No one outside your order would ever understand the greatest skill an assassin needed was not stealth, not agility, not even precision. It was endurance, the endurance to withstand disgust, fear, hunger, and the knowledge that survival often demanded you crawl into places no human should ever enter. And after all that, after the kill, after the escape, after the unbearable hours in that pit, you returned only to find that your payment had been reduced. The job required improvisation, the handler said flatly, as if improvisation wasn't the only reason you were still alive. You didn't argue. You didn't protest. You simply nodded, aware that disagreement might cost you far more than silver. You walked into the night with your pouch half full, your body aching, your mind exhausted, and your shadows stretched long behind you, reminding you quietly that this life offered no justice, no fairness, only continuation. As you lay down that night on a bed made of straw, your cloak still damp from the sewage, your dagger resting beneath your cheek, you understood something deeper than fear or regret. You realized that being an assassin was not a series of kills. It was a series of awakenings, moments where pieces of yourself peeled away and fell into the dark, leaving you more hollow and more silent than before. And somehow, in that hollow space, you felt something like belonging, not to the world, but to the night itself, a place where no one asked your name, where no one cared what you had done yesterday, where survival was the only praise you ever received. You closed your eyes, not to sleep but to rest your bones, and breathed quietly as the night wrapped its arms around you. You didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning, the first steps of a path that would stretch into places far darker than any pit, far quieter than any cellar, and far lonelier than any mountaintop. And as your heartbeat slowed, steady and controlled the way you'd been trained, you felt the truth settle into you with the weight of a blade in this life. Even your dreams would not belong to you anymore. You drift further now, deeper into the place where your pulse becomes the only clock you trust, and the world outside shrinks until it feels like nothing more than a distant memory. After the second assignment, you expected your life to settle into a rhythm, something grim but predictable. Something that allowed you to move through nights with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they had become. Instead, the world tightened around you, supple at first, like a rope laid gently across the shoulders. Then it tightened again, and again, until the air itself carried a weight you could taste every time you exhaled. Because killing someone was one thing, disappearing afterward was another. But navigating the days between assignments, those were the moments where a single misstep could end you. You learned quickly that the time between kills was where assassins truly earned the right to keep breathing. Those days were the strangest days of all, because they were neither peaceful nor chaotic, but something in between. A tense, buzzing stillness that clung to you like damp fog. You spent those days moving from town to town, changing identities the way other people changed shirts. Never staying longer than a week. Never ordering the same food twice at the same stall. Never letting anyone see your face for more than a heartbeat. You became fluent in blending. Fluent in silence. Fluent in the language of avoidance. Every lantern you passed felt like a spotlight. Every footstep behind you felt like danger rehearsing its entrance. Even laughter became suspicious, as if someone were laughing about you instead of near you. Your training had taught you that movement was safety, that stillness meant being found, so you traveled with the rhythm of a wandering ghost, slipping through forests at dawn, crossing bridges before markets opened, sleeping in barns, in abandoned cellars, sometimes in the hollowed-out trunks of trees, large enough to hide a man who no longer belonged anywhere. In those spaces, the world felt strange, like you were watching it through a thin film separating you from everyone else. You saw families preparing meals by candlelight, lovers whispering promises in alleyways, children playing games under the watch of tired parents, and for a moment, just a moment, you allowed yourself to wonder what your life might have been had you never been caught stealing that loaf. Had no one ever whispered, "Can you climb walls?" The question always hurt, because you knew the answer didn't matter anymore. Your life was more shadow than flesh now, more silence than voice, more memory than presence. And yet, though you tried to shake that thought away, the world had other plans. Because the third assignment did not arrive through an old woman, or a bigger boy, or a coded symbol carved into stone. It arrived through absence, something missing instead of something added. You returned to one of your usual safe houses, a small room behind a tailor's shop, tucked behind bolts of cloth and a wall that never quite settled straight. You expected dust, the faint smell of old fabric, and the quiet, familiar breathing of a place that had never questioned your existence. But when you pushed open the door, the air felt different, disturbed, as if someone had entered while you were gone and left without wanting to be known. On the table where you kept maps, sharpening stones, and small scraps of notes written in a code only you could read, one item was missing: your whetstone, the one you had used since your days in the mountain camp. It had never left your possession. Not once. And it would never have disappeared unless someone wanted you to notice. Your heart stuttered for a moment. Not in fear, but in recognition. This was a signal, and not from your superiors. This was from the law. Or from someone who wanted you dead, just as much as they wanted the man you were being sent after. Instead of running, you sat down, slowly, quietly. The world narrowed again to that thin point where steel and instinct met, and your breath steadied the way you had practiced 1,000 times in darkness. For the next hour, you listened to the walls, to the faint hum of the street outside, to the settling of the wood under your feet. Then you saw it, a slip of parchment, so thin it almost vanished in the crevice between two floorboards. A single line, written in simpler ink. He knows you're coming. No signature. No mark. Just a statement that felt less like information and more like a warning. You folded the parchment once, tucked it into your sleeve, and began preparations for whatever waited next. This third target was unlike the others. Not a merchant fat with greed. Not a steward drunk with borrowed authority. This time, it was a general. A man with scars carved across his arms like tally marks from battles he had survived. A man with soldiers loyal enough to die for him. A man whose instincts had been sharpened by decades of surviving ambushes, betrayals, and political traps. Killing him would not be quiet, and it would not be simple. The message in your room made it clear that someone wanted him alive enough to warn him, or someone wanted you dead enough to lure you into a trap. But you didn't hesitate. Assassins weren't allowed to hesitate. And even if they were, hesitation didn't suit you anymore. You spent 2 days watching the general's estate, studying guard shifts, kitchen routines, stable movement, learning every possible exit, every possible hiding spot, every sound the wood made when stepped on by heavy boots versus light ones. You stayed awake through the night, perched on rooftops with your cloak drawn tight, breathing through your teeth to avoid visible vapor in the cold, listening to the soft groans of old houses settling into the dark. By the third night, you knew the estate better than its own servants. But what you didn't anticipate was the general's daughter. She moved through the halls with lantern light, trailing behind her like a tamed flame. Her footsteps soft but confident, her eyes scanning shadows in a way that told you she wasn't simply used to danger. She expected it. She was the reason the message had been left in your room. You knew it instantly. The way predators recognize each other in the dark. She had spotted you on the first night. Not fully. Not your face. But something your silhouette, your breath, the slightest flicker of movement had alerted her. And unlike the others, she hadn't raised an alarm. She'd simply waited, watching for you from behind the safety of her father's walls. The night you struck was colder than usual. The kind of cold that bit through your gloves and made every metal surface feel like the teeth of a winter wolf. You slipped into the estate through a narrow stone gutter that ran beneath the kitchen, moving with the practiced slowness of someone who had tunneled through worse passages in worse places. You made your way toward the general's quarters. Your dagger took it against your wrist. Your breath silent, your eyes adjusting quickly to the dim light filtering through cracks in the doors. You reached his room just as he rose from bed, as if the air itself had whispered your presence to him. His hand moved for his sword. Yours moved faster. You pressed the dagger to his throat before he fully understood what stood before him. But then you froze, not because of fear, not because of pity, but because of the soft click behind you. The daughter stood in the doorway, her lantern spilling a pool of gold onto the stone floor. Her hand poised on a small blade she clearly knew how to use. She didn't scream. She didn't call guards. She only whispered, "So it's you." In that moment, 3 lives hung suspended in a fragile triangle of breath, light, and steel. You could have killed him. You could have killed her. Or you could have let them both live and seal your own fate. But something in her eyes, a strange mixture of resolve and resignation, told you that this was not a simple assignment. This was a message, a test, and perhaps even a warning that someone wanted this general not dead but rattled, shaken enough to shift the balance of political power. So you did something unthinkable. You stepped back. You lowered the dagger slowly, cautiously, never breaking your gaze from hers. You pressed the blade back into your sleeve and whispered, "Not tonight." Then you vanished into the dark before she could breathe another word, leaving behind a general very much alive, a daughter who now knew your shadow like a memory, and a political storm that would churn long after you'd disappeared into the night. When you finally reached the forest beyond the city walls, when you leaned against the rough bark of an old oak and allowed your lungs to fill with cold, clean air, you realized that something irreversible had happened. You had walked away from a kill. And in your world, mercy wasn't compassion. Mercy was a signature, a mark, a trail. Someone would know. Someone already did. And now, whether you intended it or not, you had stepped into a deeper darkness than any you'd faced before, a darkness not shaped by blades or shadows, but by choices you were never meant to make. You didn't look back. Assassin never look back. But the night did, and it watched you with eyes you would soon learn to fear. You carry the weight of that night like a bruise beneath the ribs, a place you can't touch without feeling the sharp reminder of what you did and what you refused to do. Sparing the general was not an act of mercy. Not truly. It was an instinct, a flash of something buried beneath years of discipline. something you were trained to kill, but that still flickered inside you like a stubborn flame. You thought walking away would end it. You thought disappearing into the forest, melting into the branches and fog and cold soil. You would bury your mistake beneath the silence you had mastered so well. But silence is never empty for people like you. It carries echoes, and one echo leads to another, until suddenly every shadow looks like it's following you, and every breath behind you feels too close to belong to a stranger. You moved for several days without stopping, driven by instinct more than strategy, letting the cold wind strip the scent of the city from your skin and hair, letting the rain rinse the last traces of that room from your hands. You slept in short bursts, curled beneath tree roots or inside collapsed barns. One eye open, dagger resting against your palm. Your heart beat steady only because you forced it to be. But even as your body recovered, your mind refused to rest. You kept replaying the moment the daughter stepped into the doorway, her lantern lighting the edges of your silhouette, your blade held against her father's throat. The stillness in her voice, the certainty in her eyes, the knowledge that she had seen you and chosen not to scream. She had made a choice too, and choices have consequences in your world. Consequences that ripple outward in ways you can't predict, like cracks spreading from the center of thin ice. By the fourth day, you reached a town far from the general's territory, a place known not for its wealth or soldiers but for its anonymity. A town where strangers came and went without raising questions, where merchants traded gossip instead of weapons, where guards were too lazy or too bored to remember faces. You slipped into the market with the ease of a man who had become invisible long before he lost his name. You bought bread with coins earned from kills now too distant to remember clearly. You drank watered ale in a tavern where no one noticed the way your shoulders faced the door. And you sat in a corner watching people live lives that seemed foreign to you now. That was when the reality finally pressed its cold hand against your spine. Someone had followed you, not close enough to be seen, not reckless enough to reveal themselves, but present like a faint thread woven through every footstep, every echo, every breath of air inside the tavern. It was the smallest detail that told you the truth, something no ordinary person would ever notice. A man across the room lifted a wooden cup, holding it with the wrong hand, for someone wearing a knife sheath on the left. A detail so insignificant that for anyone else it would mean nothing. But for you, it screamed louder than a trumpet blast. An assassin, another one, trained by someone familiar with your methods. Not one of your own. No, this was different. Observing you, perhaps judging you, waiting for an opening. You felt your throat tighten, not in fear, but in recognition. If your order had sent someone to eliminate you, they would not watch you this long. They would strike quickly, cleanly. This watcher belonged to someone else, and the question was no longer whether you were being hunted, but why. You didn't finish your drink. You left through the back door, the one that led to a narrow alley paved with uneven stones. An alley most people avoided because it smelled like stagnant water and decay. But for you, it was the perfect path. Tight corners, blind spots, places where the walls themselves acted like allies. You slipped into the shadows, blending with the gloom until the world itself swallowed you. Minutes later, footsteps followed, slow at first, then quicker, then pausing just where the alley narrowed. You listened to the breathing, the shift of weight, the familiar pattern of hesitation followed by determination. Whoever this person was, they were not a novice. When the figure stepped forward, you struck not with steel, not with violence, but with silence. Your hand clamped over their mouth. Your dagger rested at the hollow of their throat, and you pulled them back with a speed that made their eyes widen. But instead of fear, you found anger in those eyes. Anger And something worse, knowledge. I told her you'd come here. The stranger whispered, when you loosened your grip. And those words chilled you deeper than any blade could. Her, the daughter, the one who had witnessed you, the one who had seen your face in the light of that lantern, the one who had watched you lower your dagger instead of plunging it into her father's chest. She had not run. She had not reported you. She had sent someone after you. But not to kill you. Not yet. To deliver a message. She wants to meet. The stranger murmured, each word cautious, like stepping across a frozen lake. She says you spared her father. That means something. You need to hear what she knows. You almost laughed then, not out of amusement, but because of the absurdity of it. Assassins do not get summoned. Assassins do not attend meetings, or discussions, or conversations about meaning. Assassins do not owe anyone anything. But in the place behind your ribs, the bruise from the night you spared, the general pulsed again, and you realized you had already crossed too many lines to pretend you were untouched. If she knew enough to find you here, she knew enough to put you in danger whether you agreed to see her or not. You released the stranger, but not your suspicion. You kept the dagger in your hand, hidden beneath your sleeve as he explained where and when the meeting would take place. A quiet grove outside the town. A place where the trees grew thick and the light rarely touched the ground. You didn't respond. You didn't ask who else would be there. You didn't threaten him the way most assassins would. Instead, you turned away, disappearing back into the maze of alleys until you reached the main road, letting your mind sift through possibilities the way your fingers used to sift through wet grain searching for stones. By nightfall, you were already there, hidden among the roots of a fallen tree, watching the grove long before anyone arrived. The moon hung low, a thin silver blade slicing through the dark sky, and the wind hummed through the branches like a warning carried from distant mountains. You waited patiently, letting the cold stiffen your joints, letting the silence seep into your bones until you felt like part of the forest itself. And then she arrived. She walked alone, her cloak drawn tight against the night, her face half shadowed by the hood. But it was her posture controlled, steady, that told you she had not come out of fear but purpose. She stopped at the center of the grove, standing perfectly still, her hands visible, her breathing calm. You admired her composure, even as you reminded yourself that admiration was a luxury you could not afford. You stepped out slowly, carefully, letting her see you, letting the moment settle like dust in a quiet room. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a weapon. She simply spoke. "You didn't kill him," she said softly, "and that makes you the only person I can trust." The words struck you harder than any blow. Trust. Trust was a poison in your profession. Trust was a noose. Yet the way she said it, raw, steady, without trembling, made something inside you shift. Like stone loosening in a long-abandoned well. She told you then what you had not known. What no one had told you. What the parchment in your room had only hinted at the general had not been your real target. He had been a pawn. A decoy? A man placed deliberately in the path of assassins because someone powerful wanted to draw blades into the open. Someone far beyond your order. Someone who had already discovered your existence. They know your face? She whispered. They know your methods. And they know you hesitated. They will come for us both. Her voice trembled for the first time. Not from fear, but from urgency. She stepped closer, the lantern glow catching in her eyes like trapped fire. If you want to live, if you want to stay one step ahead of the men who know your name now, you must hear the rest. You must know who sent the warning, and why the blade that should have been aimed at my father is being aimed at you. The forest fell utterly silent then, as if the trees themselves were listening. and for the first time in a long time, you felt the future closing in around you, shifting like earth beneath your feet, and knew that your life had just stopped belonging entirely to the shadows. The night waited, and so did you. You stand there in the grove, the cold air tightening around you like an invisible fist, as if the night itself were holding its breath to hear whatever truth she carried. For someone who had lived a life built on silence, secrecy, and shadows, you had never felt silence quite like this, heavy, suffocating, poised on the edge of something irreversible. She looked at you not like someone facing a killer, but like someone making a choice she already knew would define everything that came next. And you understood, without needing her to say more, that nothing about your life could return to what it had been before you stepped into this clearing. She didn't rush her words. She spoke the way people speak when they know there are eyes listening from the dark, choosing her pauses carefully, letting her breath control the space around her. She told you that her father, the general you spared, was never the true target. He was a shield, a decoy planted deliberately by a faction much more dangerous than any noble or official you had ever been hired to kill. These people didn't just dabble in political games. They controlled kingdoms the way a puppeteer manipulates strings. They created wars, ended alliances, shifted wealth, erased entire families simply by deciding who deserved to keep breathing. And now they had discovered something unexpected, something that unsettled them, an assassin with enough instinct to walk away. Her voice lowered until it barely carried through the trees. "You were supposed to die that night," she said, and the words slid across your spine like ice. They wanted to test whether your order could be broken, whether its blades could hesitate, whether you could be provoked into becoming unpredictable. The thought should have angered you. But instead, you felt a deeper, colder emotion spreading through your chest, a clarity sharper than your dagger. You had been trained your entire life to kill without pause, without thought, without question. Yet the moment you hesitated, the moment you let the general live, you had become something unfamiliar, something dangerous to people who relied on knowing how every assassin would behave. And now those same people wanted to correct the defect they had exposed. You asked her why she cared, why she had risked sending someone to track you down, why she had come here alone when she easily could have brought soldiers or assassins more loyal to her father. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she sat on a moss-covered stone, the lantern's glow softening the angle of her jaw, making her look less like the fierce figure who had stood in that doorway and more like someone carrying a burden far too heavy for her age. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked not with fear, but with exhaustion. "Because my father is dying," she whispered. "Not from your blade. From them?" The statement didn't surprise you as much as it should have. People like the ones she described did not tolerate loose ends. If the general had served his purpose as bait, he was disposable. Still, the idea that sparing him had done nothing to save him, nothing to change the flow of blood in this invisible war, tightened your stomach until it felt like knots of freezing rope. "They poisoned him," she continued, staring at the ground. "Not enough to kill him quickly, enough to weaken him, to make him vulnerable, to make him dependent. And when the moment is convenient, they will finish what they started." You remained silent, letting the information fuse with all the pieces of your life you had always been forbidden to arrange. She told you then that you were only one of several assassins who had been manipulated into similar traps, each one designed to reveal who among them could be bent or broken, who could be controlled completely, and who needed to be erased. You were not the only one who had hesitated, but you were the only one still alive. That part struck you harder than any blade. You felt, for a moment, the weight of every shadow you had ever walked through, every rooftop you had perched upon, every silent breath you had taken just before stepping across the thin border between life and death. You wondered then if your survival had been skill, instinct, or simply luck that had now run out. She stepped closer, the lantern trembling slightly in her grip, and you felt the heat of the flame brush your cheek. They're searching for you. You must know that they want to erase the flaw. They want to prove no assassin can defy them. Her certainty unsettled you not because she might be right, but because you already sensed the truth of her words pulsing beneath your skin. Assassins who defied expectations did not survive long. Assassins who hesitated were considered unstable, dangerous, disposable. Her father being poisoned was proof. And somewhere deep in your mind, a small voice whispered that your order might already be aware of all this, that perhaps the people hunting you weren't strangers at all. But you didn't say it. Some truths are too heavy to speak before they're ready. She then told you why she had come, to why she had risked placing herself in the same danger that now stalked you like a second shadow. "My father wants you to have this," she said, reaching into her cloak. She pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth, delicate and stiff with age. When she placed it in your hand, you felt the grooves through the fabric, a seal, a symbol etched into metal. He said it belongs to the one assassin who chooses to walk away, the one who sees the world clearly enough to know when a kill is wrong. You didn't unwrap it. You didn't need to. You felt the weight, the cold, the age of it, and you knew instantly it was not meant for someone like you. It was meant for someone who believed in causes, in justice, in meaning, but you had buried such beliefs long ago. She stepped back then, letting the lantern cast long shadows across the grove, making the world around you feel smaller, sharper, almost claustrophobic. "You have a choice now," she said quietly. "They think they know what you will do. They think they can predict you, but they're wrong. You can run, you can hide, you can survive. Or," she hesitated, and for the first time you saw fear flicker across her face. Not fear of you, but fear of what she was about to say. "Or you can help me, help my father, help expose them." You almost laughed then, not cruelly, not mockingly, but in disbelief. Help assassins didn't help. Assassins removed obstacles and vanished. But something about her request, about the desperation behind her composure, about the seal she had given you, about the weight of the world shifting beneath your feet, all of it formed a strange pressure you couldn't ignore. You told her the truth, not about your past, not about your fears, not about your doubts. You told her the only truth that mattered. "Those who hunt me are not the kind you can expose." She met your eyes steadily. "Then you'll expose them by surviving." The simplicity of it struck you like a thrown stone. Surviving as defiance, surviving as rebellion, surviving as the one flaw they could neither control nor correct. Wind pushed through the grove then, rustling the leaves overhead, sending the lantern's flame shivering across both your faces. It felt like a moment suspended outside of time, the kind of moment that separates the life you were forced into from the one you might yet choose. You didn't agree to help her. You didn't walk away. You simply stood there, her breath mingling with the cold night air, the seal heavy in your hand, the future pressing in on all sides like a closing fist. Sometimes a choice isn't spoken. Sometimes it's the fact that you haven't left. And the night understood. So did she. You remained in the clearing long after her words settled into the cold night air, letting the weight of everything she had revealed seep into your bones, the way winter seeps into stone. Slowly at first, then completely. The seal rested in your palm like a second heartbeat, cold and certain, and each time your fingers brushed the etched metal, something inside you stirred with a mixture of dread and reluctant recognition. You had never believed in symbols, in destiny, in anything beyond survival and the precision of a blade. Yet here you were holding an object that felt older than every lie you'd ever lived, and heavier than every truth you'd ever denied. She watched you without pushing, without pleading, simply waiting with the patience of someone who understands that the world shifts at its own pace, and that some decisions cannot be forced by fear or urgency. When you finally moved, you didn't step toward her or away from her. You simply adjusted your stance, a quiet acknowledgement that her presence was no longer a threat, but a tether pulling you into a narrative you hadn't asked for. She seemed to understand because she exhaled softly, relieved, but not victorious. The way a person breathes when they know a storm has not passed, but at least changed direction. Without another word, she turned away, her lantern's glow receding into the darkness until only faint traces of her footsteps remained. She didn't ask whether you would follow. She didn't need to. People who survive by instinct move in ways that cannot be predicted by logic, and she trusted that whatever came next would unfold from the same instinct that had spared her father. You stayed in the grove for a long time after she departed, listening to the wind move through branches, feeling the cold soil beneath your feet like a reminder that even the earth shifts when enough pressure is applied. You examined the seal one more time before tucking it deep into your cloak, burying it against your chest as if hiding it from the night itself. It felt foolish, maybe even dangerous, but something in your body resisted placing it anywhere else, as though it needed to remain close to your pulse, as though something in that ancient metal was waiting to wake. When you finally left, you didn't follow the path she took. You circled wide, slipping through underbrush and narrow animal trails, moving the way a shadow moves when it wants nothing in the world to know where it goes. By dawn, you reached a small settlement with a nameless inn, the kind of place designed for drinking forgettable ale and sleeping in beds softer than the forest floor, but harder than any comfort you deserved. You rented a room without giving your name, though the innkeeper didn't ask, perhaps sensing that some customers carried trouble with them, the way others carried coin. You closed the door behind you and leaned against it, letting the quiet swallow you whole. Sleep did not come. It never came easily, not even before your hesitation made you a target. Instead, you lay on the straw mattress with your dagger resting on your chest, the seal beneath your shirt warming slowly from the heat of your body. Every sound made you tense. A footstep in the hall, the creak of wood, a dog barking outside. Each one felt like a signal, a countdown ticking toward a moment you could not yet see. But nothing came. No blade slipped between the floorboards. No stranger tested the latch. No messenger whispered your name. The world was waiting, letting you feel the weight of the quiet before the storm. By midday, you knew the peace, if it could be called, that would not last. You left through the back door, walking with the deliberate calm of someone who had learned to disguise urgency beneath a mask of routine. The streets were crowded enough to hide in, but not crowded enough to disappear completely. So you kept your hood low and your steps steady. You bought bread from a vendor who didn't bother looking at you twice, and you ate as you walked, letting crumbs scatter beneath your boots. It was almost enough to feel normal, almost enough to pretend you were just another faceless traveler passing through. Then you saw him, not the man from the tavern, not the messenger she sent, someone else, someone whose movements were too measured, too rehearsed, too dangerously quiet to belong to a common man. He wasn't watching you directly, but he was watching the space you occupied, the air you disturbed, the path that would carry your scent. An assassin, not from your order, not from hers. Someone trained by those who saw hesitation as weakness. Someone who had been told where to find you and what to do once he did. Your pulse slowed, not from fear, but from focus. You welcomed the stillness that settled over your senses. the way the world dimmed around you until the only thing that mattered was the pattern of his footwork and the angle of his shoulders. He moved like a man used to open kills. Quick strikes. No subtlety. Not like you. Not like those raised in shadow. You led him away from the town without letting him know he was being led, turning down quiet paths with the unhurried rhythm of someone seeking solitude. He followed, believing he was hunting, not being hunted. When you reached the outskirts, where the trees stood thick and the ground softened beneath fallen leaves, you slowed just enough to let him catch up. He stepped closer, too close, and you felt the shift. The moment predators recognize each other beneath the surface of stillness. He spoke first, his voice low, confident. You're the one who walked away. You didn't answer. Assassins don't speak to those sent to kill them. Words waste breath. Words reveal intention. Words make you human. And you had learned long ago that humanity was a luxury you could not afford. He didn't wait for a reply. He lunged a clumsy strike. Too fast. Too eager. Breaking every rule of silence you had ever learned. You stepped aside with a slowness that felt almost gentle, guiding his momentum past you until he stumbled just enough for you to take advantage. Your blade met his throat before he even regained his footing. And for a moment the world paused, holding the stillness between you like a fragile line of frost. He didn't plead. He didn't bargain. He smiled. You think you're the only one? He whispered. You didn't need the rest of the sentence. You knew instantly what he meant. Others were coming. Many others. You had become prey marked by those who had no intention of letting you disappear quietly. You ended it quickly, because quick endings were mercies in your line of work, and because dragging it out would not give you any answers worth hearing. His body crumpled to the ground like a dropped cloak, silent and undramatic, swallowed by the forest floor. And as you stood over him, wiping your blade clean on the moss, the truth settled into you with the weight of inevitability. They had sent him to test you, to see whether hesitation would return, to measure whether sparing the general had softened your edge, blunted your instinct. It hadn't. You were still a blade, but now you were a blade they did not control. And blades like that did not survive long, not unless they learned to cut deeper, think faster, and move in ways even shadows couldn't predict. You looked down at the seal beneath your shirt. It felt warmer now, as if responding to the kill, as if reacting to the danger gathering around you. You slipped deeper into the forest, leaving no trail, no print, no hint of the life you had just taken. You moved not out of fear but purpose. A purpose you had not chosen, but could no longer deny. For the first time in your life, you were no longer killing because you were told to. Now, you were killing to stay alive, and the night welcomed you back with open arms. You moved through the forest, with the fluid certainty of someone who no longer questioned why they were running, only how far they could go before the world caught up. The kill behind you was already dissolving into the soil, becoming just another forgotten body, swallowed by the quiet hunger of the woods. But the words he whispered before dying clung to you like burrs caught in your cloak, tiny barbs of truth you couldn't shake off. No matter how far you walked or how many shadows wrapped around you, you think you're the only one. The question echoed again and again, mutating each time with a darker shape, an implication that the trap surrounding you wasn't narrow, it was wide, scrambling, closing in from every direction. The deeper you slipped into the forest, the more the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful or natural. It felt staged, artificial, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for you to understand something you had been too focused to notice before. The world wasn't hunting you with one assassin. It wasn't hunting you with 3. It was hunting you with many. A web meant not to kill you quickly but to exhaust you, drive you into choices you would never have made otherwise. push you toward alliances or betrayals pre-designed by people who moved pieces across kingdoms like they were playing a game of stones in the dirt. By the time dusk folded itself over the treetops, you had traveled far enough that the town was nothing more than a distant memory. You reached a stream that wound between moss-stained rocks, the water running cold and clear under the last scraps of light. You crouched low, splashing your face and washing the blood from your wrists, watching the red tint swirl into the current like ink dissolving in glass. For a brief moment, the reflection staring back at you looked almost unfamiliar eyes, sharpened by suspicion, jaw tensed by choices you never asked to make, a face too worn for someone whose age still fell on the younger side of life. Survival had shaped you more brutally than time ever could. You drank from the stream, let the cold water steady your pulse, and then you felt it, the faintest vibration along the ground. So subtle, it could have been mistaken for a breeze. Except it wasn't a breeze. It was movement. Someone was approaching. Silently, skillfully, with the kind of precision that belonged to someone trained in the same brutal curriculum you survived. Only one group of assassins in the realm moved that quietly, and they did not belong to the faction hunting you. They belonged to your own order. For a moment, you couldn't breathe. Not because of fear, but because of realization. Your order knew. They knew you had spared the general. They knew you had allowed yourself to be seen. They knew you had been warned. And now they had sent someone to find you, not to help, not to question, but to correct the mistake you had become. You moved instinctively, flattening yourself against the trunk of an ancient cedar. Your body pressed so close that the bark bruised your cheek. You slowed your breathing until it nearly vanished, controlling your pulse the way you were taught on the mountain, making yourself indistinguishable from the dark. The figure who emerged through the trees wore no cloak, no mask, no insignia. He walked with the quiet inevitability of a river cutting through stone, each step deliberate, each breath measured. He paused at the water's edge, studying the ground with the eyes of someone who could read footsteps the way scholars read scripture. Then he spoke, his voice soft enough to disappear into the wind. You always were better at hiding than the rest of us. Your jaw tightened. You knew the voice. You knew it far too well. It belonged to the man who trained you in the art of disappearing. The one who taught you how to silence your footsteps, how to blend your shadow with the shadow of a passing cloud. He had been your mentor once, if such a word could be used for someone who beat weakness out of children, with the unfeeling efficiency of a blacksmith forging iron. You stepped out of hiding slowly, silently, and he didn't flinch, didn't reach for a blade. He simply turned toward you, studying you with eyes that held neither affection nor disdain, only assessment. The same look he had given you every day at the training camp. You hesitated, he said, as if reciting an unchangeable fact rather than an accusation. You didn't deny it. Assassins don't waste breath on lies that have already been dissected. He stepped closer, and the world seemed to tighten around you like a tightening rope. They're not only hunting you because of that, he continued. They're hunting you because hesitation spreads. Once one assassin hesitates, others begin to think, to question, to choose. And that is a disease our order cannot afford. The words struck with the weight of an executioner's hammer calm. Inevitable. Deadly. You asked him if he had come to kill you, though you already knew the answer. He sighed. A sound so quiet, it could have been a leaf shifting on a branch. If I wanted you dead, he murmured, you would never have heard my footsteps. Your muscles tightened. That meant something worse than death. He wasn't here to kill you. He was here to deliver a message. You have one chance, he said, his eyes narrowing with something that wasn't anger, but disappointment carved into stone. Disappear. Completely. Do not speak to the girl again. Do not seek answers. Do not interfere with what is coming. You understood immediately what he meant. Your order wasn't allied with the faction hunting you. They were afraid of them. Afraid enough to sacrifice one of their own to avoid conflict. Afraid enough to silence you. Not because you were dangerous, but because you had become inconvenient. I taught you to survive. He continued. Consider this. Your final lesson. Walk away. Not from the kill. From everything. You looked at him then not as a mentor, not as an executioner withheld, but as a man shaped by the same merciless machine that had shaped you. For a moment, you wondered if he had ever hesitated in his youth, if he had ever spared someone, if he had ever carried a seal pressed against his chest, whispering of truths larger than himself. His eyes betrayed nothing. He stepped back, fading into the darkness with the ease of a man who had become one with it long ago. As he disappeared, he left you with one last sentence, carried by the cold wind as if delivered by the forest itself. If you choose wrong, they won't just kill you. They'll erase every trace that you ever existed. The night swallowed his final echo, and you were alone again, but not the same kind of alone you had always known. This solitude carried the shape of a crossroads, a place where every path led into an unknown shadow, some deeper, some deadlier, some impossible to walk without losing pieces of yourself along the way. You touched the seal beneath your shirt. It felt warm now, almost alive, and in that warmth, you sensed a truth your mentor hadn't said aloud. The real danger wasn't that they were hunting you. The real danger was that they were afraid of what you might become if they failed to catch you. So you moved again, deeper into the forest where even shadows hesitated to follow, each step carving you further away from the life you once knew. Each breath drawing you closer to a war you had never agreed to fight, but could no longer escape. Behind you, the world tightened its net. Ahead of you, the dark waited not to consume you, but to reveal what happens when a blade learns to cut for itself. You walked deeper into the forest, until even the familiar language of branches and wind began to change. The rustling turning sharper, the darkness gathering more deliberately, as if the world were adjusting itself to your presence. You had always moved like a shadow, but now the forest seemed to move with you, guiding you through tight corridors of trees, opening narrow paths that disappeared. The moment you stepped past them, it felt less like wandering, and more like being led, though you told yourself it was only instinct sharpening in the face of danger. Yet you couldn't ignore the strange sensation that each step took you further from the world you once knew, and deeper into something you had not yet defined. Something larger and older than any order of assassins or faction of power brokers. You didn't stop walking until the night thinned into dawn, the pale light dripping like silver through the canopy. You settled beside a fallen oak, its vast roots curling like the bones of an ancient creature, and you finally allowed your body to rest. Sleep did not come. Not truly, but your limbs loosened, your breathing steadied, and your mind drifted into that strange half-state between awareness and memory. The seal pressed against your chest felt warmer than it had the night before, its metal absorbing your body heat until it felt almost alive. You tried to ignore that warmth, but your thoughts kept circling back to it, drawn like a moth to fire. You had never believed in relics or symbols. Yet the weight of this one shaped your decisions before you even realized they were being shaped. You were beginning to drift when the air shifted so subtle that a normal person would have slept through it. But you had never been normal. You opened your eyes slowly, without moving a muscle, letting your senses take in the change, the faint displacement of air, the delicate pressure of a presence watching from a distance, the soft crunch of leaves under a foot that knew how to hide its weight. Someone had followed you, but not your mentor. Not the clumsy killer from before. No, this one moved with a careful rhythm. Someone who understood the forest. Who understood you. Someone who didn't want to startle you so much as test whether you were still alive. You didn't reach for your dagger. You didn't shift your breathing. You simply waited, letting the watcher decide whether to step closer. When they finally did, it wasn't with the quiet intent of someone preparing to kill you. It was with the uncertain caution of someone who wasn't sure if approaching you was a mistake. You recognized the hesitation instantly, because it mirrored something in yourself. The girl stepped into view, her cloak heavy with morning dew, her hair pulled back into a tight braid, her face pale from lack of sleep. She looked smaller than she had in the grove, younger even, as though the weight of the night had carved years off her spirit instead of adding them. She didn't speak immediately. Perhaps she was waiting for you to strike. Perhaps she believed you might vanish the moment she blinked. But you remained still, giving her space to decide what the morning demanded of her. "I knew you wouldn't go far," she finally said, her voice soft but steady, like a river that had flowed through too many stones to be easily disrupted. "They won't stop, not until they finish what they started." You didn't ask how she had found you. You knew already. You hadn't tried to hide from her. Not truly. Some part of you quiet, stubborn, inconvenient, had allowed her path to trace yours. You didn't answer her right away, and she didn't rush you. She walked closer and sat on a broken piece of the oak trunk, keeping a respectful distance but refusing to let fear push her away. When she spoke again, her tone changed, taking on the calm urgency of someone who had made a decision long before the words finally escaped her mouth. "You asked why I came to you," she said. "It wasn't only because of my father. It was because you were the first assassin I'd ever seen who didn't look dead inside." You hesitated. That means you're still human. And right now, humanity is the only thing that can stand against them. You let those words hang between you, heavy as iron. Humanity, a luxury for others, a burden for assassins. You were trained to live without it, to kill without it, to cut away every piece of yourself that might slow the blade. Yet somehow, in the moment, you stepped back from the general's throat. That forbidden humanity had slipped through the cracks of your discipline, and now it had grown into something too large to crush. She reached into her cloak and pulled out another object, smaller than the seal, but wrapped in cloth with the same deliberate care. She held it out to you, her hand shaking only slightly. "This belonged to someone who tried to fight them before," she whispered. "Someone like you. Someone who understood what they really are." You took the object carefully, unwrapping it without letting your guard down. Inside was a small piece of parchment, old enough that the edges crumbled when touched. The writing was faded but still legible, a single sentence scrawled in hurried strokes. "They do not want control. They want silence." You stared at the words, the ink blurring slightly as if the parchment itself resisted being read. Silence. Not dominance. Not power. Silence. The type of silence that erases entire bloodlines, entière histories, entière truths. The kind of silence your profession had been built to maintain. You felt something dark and familiar coil inside your chest, not fear, but recognition. Every kill you had ever been assigned, every whisper you had ever followed, every life you had taken, how many were chosen by this faction? This unseen force that manipulated your order like puppeteers in a cathedral of shadows. You closed the parchment, your breath slowing until you could hear your pulse echo in your ears. She watched you carefully, her eyes searching your face for a reaction. "They want you gone," she said, "not because you're dangerous to them, but because you're not predictable anymore. They fear what they can't calculate." She paused, swallowing hard. but you could be more dangerous to them than any of your kind. Not because of your blade, because you think. Her words hit you like a stone dropped into deep water, sinking quickly through the layers of your thoughts until they struck something long buried. You had never seen yourself as anything except a tool, a weapon, a knife guided by someone else's hand. But now you were not being guided. You were choosing your own direction, and in doing so, you had become something your order had never planned for. The girl leaned forward, her voice trembling with both fear and conviction. If you help me, we can expose them, not destroy them. They're too powerful for that. But we can show the world the truth. And truth, once spoken, is harder to silence than any blade. You didn't respond immediately. You let her words settle, mixing with the memories of your mentor's warning, with the dying assassin's taunt. With the weight of the seal warm against your skin, you felt the choice forming slowly, not the kind made in haste or desperation, but the kind carved from inevitability. You didn't know whether you were capable of helping her, but you knew one thing with absolute certainty: walking away would no longer protect you. The girl stood, brushing dirt from her cloak. If you're going to leave, leave now, she said quietly. If you stay, go all the way. There's no path halfway between us and them. Then she turned, giving you her back, a sign of trust so profound it stunned you into silence. She walked toward the edge of the forest, the morning light shaping her silhouette into something fragile and resolute all at once. You didn't follow, not at first, but you didn't leave either. And when you finally stood, the forest seemed to lean toward you, as if recognizing the shape of the choice settling into your bones. You moved not because she asked, not because you hesitated, not because you feared being hunted. You moved because for the first time in your life, you weren't running away. You were stepping towards something, and the shadows parted not to hide you, but to let you through. You waited only long enough to feel the weight of the choice settle fully inside you. Not like a burden, but like a new spine forming beneath the old one. Stronger, steadier, built from something other than obedience. The girl's footsteps faded into the morning quiet, and you followed at a distance that felt both intentional and instinctive, neither too close to be seen as surrender, nor too far to be mistaken for retreat. The forest watched you go, branches swaying as though trying to warn you that stepping out of its shelter meant entering a world where shadows sharpened their teeth. But you kept walking, your stride growing more certain with each step, the seal warm against your chest, the memory of your mentor's warning echoing behind you like the last note of a dying song. By midday, the trees thinned, giving way to a stretch of open land dotted with abandoned farmhouses. Their roofs collapsed inward like dead lungs. You moved carefully, every sense alert, the air too still for your liking, the silence too deliberate. The girl walked ahead of you, her posture straight, her gaze focused. But you could tell she felt the wrongness too. It clung to the air in threads of tension, invisible but undeniable, like the faint scent of smoke before flames catch. She slowed near a dilapidated stone well, running her fingers along its cracked rim, and you knew before she spoke that something was about to shift. "They'll come here," she said quietly, her eyes tracing the horizon. "Not today, not this hour, but soon. This is where their messengers pass, where their orders are exchanged. My father always said the well remembers things others want forgotten." You stepped closer, studying the structure. There was something unsettling about it, not its age or decay, but the way it seemed to pull at the air, drawing whispers from places too far away for the human ear. You leaned over the edge. Darkness. Deep, undisturbed darkness. A place where secrets were thrown like stones, and expected never to surface again. While you stared, she unrolled a small map, the parchment fraying at the edges. She pointed to a symbol near the borders of 3 provinces, a mark shaped like a broken circle. "This is where they meet," she said, "where decisions are made, where people are erased. My father tried to expose it years ago. That's why they poisoned him. Not because he disobeyed, because he knew too much." Her voice cracked on the last word, barely perceptible, but enough to reveal the truth she had buried beneath her resolve. "You didn't offer comfort. Assassin don't. But you listened. And listening was a rarity in your world." She took a breath and continued. "If we reach that place, we can find evidence, names, ledgers, orders, things that cannot be burned away by whispers. But getting there means crossing territory controlled by people who answer to no kingdom." You didn't need her to finish. You knew the kind she meant. Mercenaries, hunters, loyal to no one, owned by everyone with enough gold or enough fear in their voice. Crossing their land meant walking through a nest where every eye measured your worth in blades. Still, you nodded. Not to reassure her, but to accept the inevitable. You had already crossed too many lines to turn back. You traveled for hours without speaking. Your footfalls synchronized, not by intention, but by necessity. The land around you shifted from open fields to jagged hills, each slope shaped like a knuckle rising from the earth. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground, you began to feel the presence of others, unseen but unmistakable. The kind of watchers who perched on ridges the way crows perch on corpses, waiting for the moment something stops breathing. It didn't take long before you saw the first sign. A metal snare, half hidden beneath leaves. A tripwire glinting faintly in the last gold of daylight. The girl spotted it too, and froze. You approached slowly, kneeling beside the trap, tracing its construction with the precision of someone trained to understand mechanisms of death. It wasn't meant to wound. It was meant to kill instantly, and it had been set recently. "They know," you murmured. She didn't ask what you meant. She understood. The hunters weren't merely guarding their territory. They were expecting someone, either her, you, or both. You moved more cautiously after that, weaving through the terrain with the grace of someone navigating old memories. Twice you redirected her from disguised pits. 3 times you spotted crossbow triggers hidden between rocks. The sky darkened. The air grew colder, and then you felt it, a presence different from the watchers. Heavier, deliberate. A figure who didn't hide his approach. He stepped into view from the crest of a hill. Tall, draped in a long coat made from animal hides. His hair tied back in braids, threaded with bone. His face bore the expression of someone who had never needed to explain himself a single day in his life. His gaze flicked from you to the girl, lingering on her for just a second too long, and you felt the pull of danger tighten around your spine. "You should not be here," he said, his voice gravel-soft, carrying the authority of someone whose words often ended conversations or lives. The girl stood her ground, but you stepped slightly in front of her, a movement so subtle she may not have noticed. But he did. His smile was slow and knowing. "You brought a weapon," he murmured, "and a relic." He pointed to your chest, where the seal lay hidden beneath your cloak. You didn't ask how he sensed it. Men like him didn't survive by guessing. They survived by listening to the things other people tried to hide. "You're headed to the broken circle," he said, "and you expect to leave it alive." His words were not mocking. They were factual. The way someone might state the shape of the moon or the color of the sky. You held his stare, and in that silence, 2 killers measured each other not in hostility, but in understanding. He wasn't your enemy unless you chose him to be. He was an obstacle only if you made him one. The girl spoke before you could. We need passage. He studied her again, more intently this time, as if trying to read a script written behind her eyes. Then he turned to you, and something in his expression shifted respect. Maybe, or curiosity sharpened by recognition. You walk like someone who has recently stopped following orders, he said. And people like that are unpredictable, dangerous, worth watching. He stepped closer, and for a moment you thought the air might tighten enough to snap. Instead, he pressed a small token into your palm, a piece of carved stone marked with the same broken circle you had seen on the map. If you want to enter, show them this, he said. If you want to survive, don't speak once you're inside. And if you want to leave, he paused, his gaze steady. You will need more than your blade. He turned without another word and vanished into the descending dark, moving with the certainty of someone who trusted the night more than the daylight. The girl approached you, her breath shaky. Why did he let us pass? She whispered. You looked down at the carved stone in your hand, feeling its weight, its shape, its ancient familiarity. You didn't know why, but you suspected the reason was the same one she had spoken aloud hours earlier. You were no longer predictable, and between those who erased lives and those who survived them, unpredictability was the one thing that could unbalance the scales. You and the girl walked onward, guided now by the faint markings carved into the stone paths ahead, each step drawing you closer to the broken circle, closer to the truth, closer to the point of no return. The night deepened, thick as ink, and the shadows welcomed you like an old friend. You followed the faint trail carved into the earth by hands long dead, each symbol in the dirt illuminated only when the moon slipped free from the clouds. The carved token from the hunter weighed heavily in your palm, heavier than any metal dagger you had ever carried. Not because of its mass, but because of the unspoken truth it represented. You were walking towards something no assassin was ever meant to see. The girl walked beside you in tense silence, her breathing shallow, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness, the way a wounded animal watches for predators. And though she tried to hide it, you could feel fear rolling off her in waves, subtle but sharp enough to change the rhythm of her steps. You understood that fear, you shared it. Not fear of death, it was far too familiar to frighten you anymore, but fear of the unknown. Fear of stepping into the center of the web where the spider waited. The land changed gradually as you descended into a valley shaped like a cupped hand. The hills rising around you as if the earth itself wished to contain whatever was hidden within. Trees grew denser here, their branches intertwining overhead like a woven canopy designed to choke out the sky. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp leaves, and something metallic that made the back of your throat tighten. It felt ancient, like the breath of something that had been asleep for centuries. And as you moved deeper, you realized you could no longer hear any night creatures, no owls, no insects, no rustling of small animals. The silence was absolute, the kind that did not occur naturally, but was imposed by something with power. You reached the base of the valley when the path ended abruptly at a wall of black stone, towering high enough that even your assassin's eyes struggled to trace the edges. The stone absorbed light rather than reflecting it, a void carved into the world. At first, you saw nothing else, no entrance, no marking, no sign that anyone had ever passed through. But then the girl took the carved token from your hand and held it close to the stone. Slowly, impossibly, the surface began to shift, rippling like water disturbed by a single drop. Lines glowed faintly beneath the dark skin of the rock, forming the shape of the broken circle. The earth groaned deeply, as though waking from an unwilling sleep, and a narrow opening split down the center of the wall. The girl hesitated. You didn't? Assassins are trained to move when the world opens, even if it opens into places no living soul should walk. The inside was colder still, a narrow corridor of stone descending at a slight angle, lit only by thin veins of faint grey light pulsing through the walls like the slow heartbeat of something massive beneath your feet. The girl followed close behind, her footsteps echoing softly despite her efforts to stay silent. You touched the wall briefly, testing it, expecting stone. Instead, it felt warm, almost alive. The corridor widened eventually into a chamber, so vast it made you stop without meaning to. Dozens of stone pillars rose from the floor like enormous ribs, each etched with symbols that drew the eye and repelled it in equal measure. Markings older than kingdoms, older perhaps than human memory. In the center stood a raised platform where cloaked figures surrounded a table carved from a single slab of red-veined rock. They did not startle at your presence. They did not speak. They simply turned toward you in perfect synchronization, as if the air had warned them you were coming the way. A forest warns its trees of approaching fire. The girl stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly but still carrying strength. "We seek the truth," she said, repeating the phrase her father had once whispered during his final lucid moment. "We seek to expose the silence you built." The figures did not respond with surprise. Instead, one stepped closer, his cloak parting enough to reveal the edge of a mask carved from pale bone. His voice, when it emerged, was soft and calm, the voice of someone accustomed to delivering orders that shaped kingdoms. "Truth is a luxury," he said. "Silence is a necessity. You should not have come here." You placed yourself between the girl and the masked figure out of instinct, every nerve in your body tightening. The chamber did not feel like a place meant for confrontation. It felt like a place meant for endings. The figure tilted his head slightly, studying you with unsettling ease. "You are the one who hesitated," he murmured. "The one who disrupted the sequence. The one who refused the role you were never meant to question. We have been waiting for you." You felt the seal beneath your cloak grow suddenly hot, as if reacting to the words, as if recognizing something you had not yet understood. The figure extended a hand. "Palm up. Give it to me," he said. "It was never meant to leave our hands." The girl grabbed your arm. "Don't," she whispered fiercely. "It holds more than they're telling you." You did not move. You did not speak. You weighed every possibility, every escape route, every shift of breath in the chamber. And then something strange happened. The humming in the walls grew louder, low, resonant, vibrating through your bones. The pillars pulsed with faint light, and the air thickened with pressure. The bone-masked figure stepped closer. "If you give it willingly, you may leave alive," he said. "If you defy us, you will not leave at all." You knew the threat was not a bluff. Not here, not in the heart of the broken circle. But you also knew something else, something they did not expect. You had not come here to obey. You had come because every path away from this truth had been blocked, because silence had already claimed too many lives, because your hesitation had grown into a force sharp enough to cut through fear. You reached into your cloak, feeling the warm metal of the seal, and for a moment the girl inhaled sharply, thinking you were about to hand it over. Instead, you stepped back, your hand tightening around the object as you spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. "If you built the silence," you said quietly, "then you should know one thing." The figures leaned in slightly, like wolves sensing the approach of a blade. Silence dies when someone refuses to stop speaking. There was no time to see their reaction. The walls trembled violently. The pillars cracked with the force of thunder, and a deep roar rose from the ground, as if the earth itself had been waiting centuries for someone to break the cycle. Shadows exploded outward, sweeping through the chamber as the hidden mechanisms that powered the broken circle awakened in a violent surge. The girl screamed your name, grabbing your wrist as the floor split beneath your feet. The red-veined stone fracturing like shattered bone. Figures scattered. Masks clattered. The chamber collapsed in torrents of dust and darkness. You pulled the girl toward the narrow exit, your muscles burning, your breath ripping through your chest, the seal glowing fiercely now as if guiding you. The ground fell away behind you. Entire sections of the chamber swallowed by the earth. You didn't look back. You couldn't. All you could do was run, dragging her with you as the valley groaned around you like a beast finally released from its cage. When you burst into the night, the stone wall slammed shut behind you with a force that shook the ground. The valley was silent again, but no longer unnaturally. The oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by something raw and unsettled. The girl collapsed to her knees, gasping, her hands shaking. You stood beside her, your chest heaving, the seal still burning, hot against your skin. She looked up at you, tears streaking dirt down her face. "What did you do?" she whispered. You stared at the place where the entrance had been, feeling the pulse of the seal sinking with your own. The truth came to you not as a revelation, but as an inevitability you had been walking towards since the night you spared her father. "I ended their silence," you said softly, "and now the world will hear the noise." The night around you seemed to inhale deeply, as if bracing for what would come next. And you knew your story wasn't ending here. This was the beginning of the war they thought you would never dare to fight.